Boy disappeared from school field trip. Decades later, a janitor found this in the basement. The morning fog clung to the hills surrounding Hollow Creek Academy like ghostly fingers, refusing to release its grip even as the yellow school buses rumbled up the winding driveway. 12-year-old Caleb Rowe pressed his face against the cool glass window, his breath creating small clouds that expanded and contracted with each exhale. Unlike the other students from Oak Ridge Elementary who fidgeted and chattered with excitement, Caleb observed the world with quiet intensity. "Remember, stick with your buddy," Mrs. Pendleton's voice carried over the seats as the bus lurched to a stop. "This is a prestigious school that's allowing us to visit their nature preserve. Best behavior, everyone." Caleb clutched his metal Star Wars lunchbox, a prized birthday gift, and fell into line behind his classmates. He hadn't been assigned a buddy. There were 23 students in Miss Pendleton's class, and Caleb, with his second-hand clothes and tendency to disappear into books rather than kickball games, had become the odd one out. "Wow," whispered Tommy Shears, the closest thing Caleb had to a friend. "Look at this place." Hollow Creek Academy stood like a fortress against the autumn sky, all red brick, ivy, and imposing oak doors. Founded in 1892, it had educated the children of celebrities and industry titans. The main building resembled an English manor house, while modern additions sprawled across the 200-acre campus. Mr. Byron Chetland, the school's facilities manager, greeted them at the entrance. Tall and lean with wire-rimmed glasses that caught the light, he offered a smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Welcome to Hollow Creek Academy," he announced, hands clasped behind his back. "Today, you'll be exploring our environmental science facilities and nature trails. You'll see why our biology program has produced 3 Rhodes Scholars in the past decade." The children shuffled through the grand entrance hall, necks craned to take in the vaulted ceilings and portraits of stern-faced headmasters. Caleb lagged behind, mesmerized by the building itself, the worn marble stairs, the brass fixtures darkened by decades of hands, the whispers of history in every corner. "Keep up, Caleb," Mrs. Pendleton called, not unkindly. "We don't want anyone getting lost." The morning passed in a blur of laboratories with gleaming equipment, greenhouses with exotic plants, and carefully maintained woodland trails. Caleb scribbled observations in his notebook, his precise handwriting filling page after page. He sketched the unusual rock formations behind the athletic fields and the strange fungi growing on fallen logs. At lunchtime, the children gathered on the academy's central lawn. Students from Hollow Creek passed by in their crisp navy uniforms, casting curious glances at the public school visitors. Caleb sat alone beneath a massive oak tree, opening his lunchbox to reveal a peanut butter sandwich, an apple, and his favorite plastic army man, a silent companion he'd carried since his father left 3 years ago. "That's a neat lunchbox," said a voice. Caleb looked up to see a Hollow Creek student, a girl about his age with a dark braid and serious eyes. "Thanks," Caleb replied, surprised. "I like Star Wars." "I'm Alexandra," she said, sitting down without waiting for an invitation. "My dad teaches physics here. This place gets boring when you see it every day." For the next 20 minutes, they talked about books and space and whether aliens might exist. It was the longest conversation Caleb had had with anyone his age in months. "I should show you something cool before you leave," Alexandra said suddenly, checking her watch. "There's an old storage room in the East Wing basement with specimens from the 1800s. My dad gave me the key because I'm helping catalog them for my science project." Caleb hesitated. "We're supposed to stay with the group." Alexandra shrugged. "It'll only take 10 minutes. We'll be back before anyone notices." Caleb glanced at his classmates scattered across the lawn. Mrs. Pendleton was deep in conversation with one of the academy teachers. Tommy was trading baseball cards with some boys. "Okay," he decided, carefully repacking his lunchbox and slipping the army man into his pocket. They cut across the lawn toward a side entrance, Alexandra moving with the confidence of someone who belonged. Inside, the cool darkness of the building enveloped them. Their footsteps echoed on polished floors as they descended a narrow staircase. "This way," Alexandra whispered. Though there was no need, the basement corridor stretched before them, lit by fluorescent lights that flickered intermittently. "The specimen room is just past the boiler room." As they rounded a corner, Caleb froze. Through a partially open door he glimpsed Mr. Chetland, the facilities manager, hastily stacking boxes. What caught Caleb's attention wasn't the boxes themselves, but their contents: microscopes, beakers, and equipment clearly marked with the school's emblem, all being loaded into crates, labeled for delivery. Alexandra hadn't noticed. She was already several steps ahead. Caleb backed away slowly, but his elbow knocked against a metal pipe. The clang echoed through the corridor, like a gunshot. Mr. Chetland's head snapped up. For a moment their eyes locked, Caleb's wide with confusion, Chetland's narrowing with calculation. "Run," Caleb whispered to himself. But before he could move, Alexandra had already returned and grabbed his arm. "Come on! The specimen room is just ahead." "I think we should go back," Caleb stammered, but she was already pulling him forward past the boiler room door that was now firmly shut. Behind them, footsteps followed, unhurried but deliberate. When Mrs. Pendleton gathered the children for departure an hour later, she frowned as she checked her list. "Has anyone seen Caleb? Caleb Rowe?" Heads shook, shoulders shrugged. The teachers conducted a quick search of the immediate grounds, then a more thorough one as concern mounted. By nightfall, police officers with flashlights combed the woods surrounding Hollow Creek Academy. By the weekend, Caleb's school photo appeared on telephone poles and in shop windows throughout the county. By month's end, the search had dwindled to occasional follow-ups on dwindling leads. Caleb Rowe had vanished, becoming just another name on a missing persons database. Another unsolved case in a world full of them. All that remained was a mother who never gave up hope, and somewhere in the echoing halls of Hollow Creek Academy, a Star Wars lunchbox wrapped in a navy sweater hidden away with the truth. Gene Talbot didn't choose to be a janitor at Hollow Creek Academy. Life had chosen for him. At 47, with a bad knee from his construction days and only a GED to his name, the steady paycheck and health insurance were nothing to scoff at. Besides, there was something peaceful about moving through the school's empty corridors after the students and faculty had gone home, returning order to the chaos they left behind. Tonight he was tackling the school's East Wing basement, a section largely abandoned since the new science building opened in 2008. The area was scheduled for demolition next month, part of the Academy's endless cycle of modernization. Gene's job was to salvage anything worth keeping and clear out the rest. "What a waste," he muttered, shining his flashlight across shelves of obsolete textbooks and broken lab equipment. The beam caught something unusual, a hairline crack in the drywall that didn't match the rest of the room's construction. Curious, Gene tapped the wall with his knuckles. The hollow sound confirmed his suspicion. This wasn't original to the building. Someone had constructed a false panel here, probably in the 80s based on the materials. Years of working in construction had given Gene an eye for such details. He wedged his utility knife into the crack and pried gently. The panel resisted, then gave way with a soft crunch, revealing a narrow gap behind the wall, a forgotten storage space between structural beams. "What have we here?" Gene murmured, aiming his flashlight into the darkness. The beam illuminated something incongruous. A splash of faded red and yellow against the dusty gray backdrop. Gene reached in, his fingers closing around fabric wrapped around a metal object. He pulled it out carefully, dust billowing around him. A child's sweater, navy blue with the Hollow Creek crest wrapped around a metal lunchbox. Star Wars. The kind nobody had made in decades. "The hell?" Gene whispered, his breath visible in the chilly basement air. He unwrapped the sweater with careful hands. The lunchbox beneath was in pristine condition, preserved in its dark hiding place for what must have been years. Gene eased open the latch, half expecting it to disintegrate, but it held firm. Inside was a perfectly preserved time capsule, a peanut butter sandwich turned to stone, an apple shriveled to the size of a golf ball, a juice box collapsed in on itself, and a small green plastic army man standing sentinel over it all. Nestled beneath the food was a folded piece of notebook paper, the pencil writing faded but legible. Gene unfolded it with trembling fingers and read the childish scrawl. "I saw what he did in the boiler room. He said I'd vanish too." An involuntary shudder ran through him. He recognized the lunchbox now, or rather, what it represented. Though he'd only lived in town for 15 years, everyone knew the story of the boy who vanished from a field trip in It was the kind of local legend that mothers used to warn children about strangers, the kind of tragedy that defined a community. Gene sat heavily on an overturned bucket, the lunchbox in his lap. The world seemed suddenly quiet, as if the building itself were holding its breath. Jesus Christ, he whispered. He should call someone. The police? The school administration? Both, probably. But for a moment he simply sat there, an unexpected connection to a decades-old tragedy in his weathered hands. The walk to Principal Gardner's office felt like a dream. The security guard raised his eyebrows at Jean's disheveled appearance, but waved him through. Jean had never been inside the principal's office before. Janitors rarely had reason to cross that threshold. Mr. Talbot? Dr. Catherine Gardner looked up from her computer. Is everything all right? You look like you've seen a ghost. Maybe I have, Jean replied, placing the lunchbox on her polished desk. Found this hidden in the East Wing basement, behind a fake wall. She frowned, opening the lunchbox with manicured fingernails. Her expression changed as she examined the contents, hardening when she read the note. Where exactly did you find this? Her voice was measured, controlled. Section E, near the old boiler room. And you've shown this to just you? Came straight here. Gardner nodded, reaching for her phone. I need to call the police. And the board chair. She paused, studying Jean's face. This could be connected to the road disappearance. That's what I figured, Jean said. The missing kid from the field trip. It was before my time here, but everybody knows the story. Not everybody knows the whole story, Gardner said cryptically. The academy has protected certain aspects of that incident. Within hours the school was swarming with police. Jean found himself repeating his discovery to increasingly higher-ranking officers. By midnight the district attorney herself was on site directing the placement of evidence markers around the false wall panel. You've worked here how long, Mr. Talbot? Detective Lori Mendez asked, her dark eyes shrewd beneath her silver hair. Going on 8 years now. And you never noticed this panel before? Jean shook his head. No reason to. That section's been used for storage since before I started. Nobody goes back there except to dump more junk. Mendez nodded, making notes. Did you know that Caleb Rowe's disappearance was never officially solved? Missing persons case. Technically still open. No body ever found. I heard rumors. That he ran away, or was taken by some drifter. Convenient explanations, Mendez said dryly, especially for the school. The forensics team extracted the notebook paper with gloved hands, carefully placing it in an evidence bag. Jean watched as they photographed and documented every aspect of his discovery. Think they'll finally figure out what happened to him? Jean asked. Mendez's eyes flicked to the sweater, now being sealed in a large evidence bag. One way or another. Cold cases are funny, they sit dormant for decades. Then suddenly break wide open because someone like you notices what everyone else missed. As dawn broke over Hollow Creek Academy, Jean finally headed home, exhaustion settling into his bones. The media vans were already gathering at the school gates. By tomorrow, everyone would know what he had found. What no one yet knew, what Jean himself couldn't possibly have guessed as he climbed into his rusted pickup truck, was that his simple act of curiosity had torn open a wound in the academy's carefully maintained facade. Beneath the prestigious name and ivy-covered walls lay secrets deeper and darker than a hidden lunchbox. The note was just the beginning. As Jean drove away, Detective Mendez was already requesting the original case files and scheduling interviews with long-retired faculty members. And in the boiler room mentioned in Caleb's haunting note, untouched for decades, evidence of old crimes waited patiently to be found. The Hollow Creek Academy boiler room hadn't been opened in nearly 45 years. The heavy steel doors sealed with both a padlock and an official notice declaring structural danger, do not enter, stared back at Detective Mendez and her forensic team like a challenge. Records show this area was condemned in 1981, supposedly due to asbestos and foundation issues. Mendez said, reviewing the blueprints spread across a folding table. Convenient timing, wouldn't you say? Just 2 years after the Rowe boy disappeared. The locksmith made quick work of the ancient padlock. As the door swung open, stale air rushed out, carrying decades of dust and the metallic scent of long-dormant machinery. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness, revealing a cavernous space dominated by massive, antiquated boilers. Breathing apparatus on, everyone, ordered the forensic lead. We don't know what's in this air. Jean Talbot, who had been asked to stay on as a consultant due to his familiarity with the building's layout, pointed toward a section of the room partly hidden by a dividing wall. That area doesn't match these blueprints, he said. See how the wall creates a separate room? That's not in the original design. Mendez nodded, directing her team toward the anomaly. The room was actually a makeshift storage space, constructed with cinder blocks and mortar that didn't match the building's original materials. Inside they found nothing but empty shelves coated in dust. Whatever was here, it's long gone, one of the officers commented. Maybe, Mendez replied, running her gloved hand along the wall. But people leave traces, even decades later. By afternoon, the forensic team had collected dust samples, photographed distinctive tool marks on the shelves, and documented unusual wear patterns on the concrete floor. Evidence of heavy objects being repeatedly moved. We need to talk to anyone who worked here in the late 70s. Mendez told her partner. Custodians, maintenance staff, anyone who might have had access to this area. Finding those people proved easier than expected. News of the discovery had spread like wildfire through the town, bringing forward several retired employees eager to share what they knew. Arnold Winters, head custodian from 1968 to 1995, sat across from Mendez in the police station interview room, his gnarled hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee. We all had our suspicions about Byron Chetland, Winters admitted, his voice gravelly with age. Man was always down there at odd hours. Said he was checking the heating system, but you don't need to check boilers at midnight, especially in summer. Did you ever see what he was storing down there? Winters hesitated. Never saw inside those crates myself, but I heard things, deliveries coming in the service entrance after hours. Equipment going missing from science labs, then magically reappearing days later. School supplies ordered in bulk, but only half making it to classrooms. Why didn't anyone report this? The old man's laugh was hollow. To who? Chetland was tight with Headmaster Phillips. Besides, it was the 70s, energy crisis, inflation, shortages of everything. Nobody questioned when things went missing. They just blamed the economy. As Mendez dug deeper, a pattern emerged. Byron Chetland had been more than just the facilities manager. He'd been the school's procurement officer, responsible for ordering all supplies and equipment. Financial records from that era showed suspicious discrepancies, orders that didn't match inventory, budgets that never quite balanced. He was running a black market operation right under their noses, Mendez explained to Gardner and the school board in an emergency meeting. Lab equipment, typewriters, even rationed supplies like certain chemicals and petroleum products. All highly valuable during the shortages of the late 70s. Gardner looked physically ill. And you believe Caleb Rowe discovered this? The note seems to suggest so, Mendez replied. His exact words were, I saw what he did in the boiler room. He said I'd vanished too. The school's attorney cleared his throat. Detective, while this is certainly disturbing, it doesn't necessarily mean Chetland harmed the boy. Perhaps he simply threatened him. Perhaps, Mendez conceded. But that doesn't explain why Caleb's lunchbox was hidden in a wall, or why he never came home. Later that week, their break came from an unexpected source. Gene Talbot approached Mendez after his shift, clutching a yellowed employee directory from I found this in the maintenance office archives, he explained. Thought you might want to talk to these two. He pointed to names Mendez hadn't encountered yet. Henry Dawkins and Paul Mercado, listed as assistant custodians in Dawkins died years ago, Gene explained, but Mercado's still around, lives in the retirement community near the interstate. And get this, he was fired just 3 months after the Rowe kid disappeared. Mendez found Paul Mercado tending tomato plants on his small patio at Sunset Gardens retirement community. At 78, his hands were still strong, his eyes alert beneath bushy white eyebrows. Wondered when someone would come asking, he said, inviting her to sit. Been reading about that lunchbox in the papers, brought it all back. You knew something about Caleb Rowe's disappearance? Mercado carefully pinched a sucker from a tomato vine, before answering. I knew Chetland was storing stolen goods in that boiler room. Knew he was selling them on the side. Henry and I stumbled across his operation while doing inventory. Did you report it? Tried to. Went to Headmaster Phillips himself. Mercado's laugh was bitter. Next day, I'm called in, accused of stealing tools. Week later, I'm fired with no references. Henry kept his mouth shut, kept his job. What about Caleb Rowe? Mercado's weathered face grew solemn. day he went missing, I was moving boxes in the east corridor. Saw him and a girl heading toward the basement. Hour later, saw Chetland coming up those same stairs, looking like he'd seen a ghost. Did you tell the police? I tried. No one believed the janitor who'd just been fired over the respected facilities manager. Besides, by then they were searching the woods, convinced he'd wandered off. As Mendez drove back to the station, pieces began falling into place. The black market operation. The boy who saw too much. The convenient sealing of the boiler room soon after. The deliberate silencing of potential witnesses. What remained unclear was what exactly had happened in those basement corridors, and where Caleb Rowe's remains might be. But one thing was becoming increasingly certain. Byron Shetland had not been alone in his deception. Others at Hollow Creek Academy had helped bury the truth, allowing a child's disappearance to become just another unsolved mystery rather than risk the school's pristine reputation. And as the investigation intensified, those who had guarded that secret for decades were beginning to feel the weight of their silence. Detective Mendez spread dozens of photographs across her desk, yearbook pictures of Caleb's classmates from 1979. Now adults in their late 50s. Two faces were circled in red: Gregory Hayes and Jennifer Whitman, the two students Mercado remembered seeing Caleb talk to at lunch on the day he disappeared. Find them, she told her team. I want to know what Caleb told them. Tracking down Jennifer Whitman proved simple. She had never left the area, working as a pharmacist at the local Rite Aid for over 30 years. Gregory Hayes had been harder to locate, having moved cross-country to Oregon, where he taught environmental science at a community college. Jennifer sat rigidly in the interview room, her once blonde hair now steel gray and cut in a severe bob. Her hands trembled slightly as she sipped from a paper cup of water. I always knew someone would come asking eventually, she said. Every time I drove past that school, I'd feel sick to my stomach. You knew what happened to Caleb? Mendez asked, keeping her voice neutral despite her racing pulse. Not exactly, but I knew what he told us that day. Jennifer closed her eyes briefly. We were sitting under the big oak tree after the nature walk. Caleb seemed jumpy. He whispered that he'd seen the facilities guy moving boxes of school stuff in the basement. Said the boxes were labeled for some company, but they had microscopes and other equipment from the science labs inside. Did he say he was going to report it? Jennifer nodded. He was that kind of kid, honest to a fault. Said he was going to tell the principal during the afternoon tour. And did he? I don't know, that was lunchtime. By the time we gathered for the afternoon activities, Caleb wasn't there. She twisted a tissue between her fingers. When they started searching for him, I tried to tell Mrs. Pendleton what Caleb had said, but Mr. Chetland was standing right there. He gave me this look. She shuddered. Later that night, my parents got a call from Headmaster Phillips himself, saying the police had determined Caleb must have wandered into the woods. He said that repeating unsubstantiated rumors would only hurt the search efforts and distress Caleb's poor mother. And you believed him? Jennifer's laugh was hollow. I was 12. He was the headmaster of the fanciest school in the county. Of course I believed him. Her eyes filled with tears. My parents were so proud that I'd been noticed by Phillips. The next year I got a full scholarship to attend Hollow Creek. Same for Greg Hayes. The implication hung in the air between them. Mendez leaned forward. Are you saying the scholarships were to keep you quiet? I didn't think so then. I thought it was because I was smart. Jennifer's voice cracked. It wasn't until college that I started questioning things. By then it seemed too late. What proof did I have? Just the word of a kid who everyone believed had run away or gotten lost in the woods. Gregory Hayes told a similar story when Mendez interviewed him via video call. He'd been more skeptical than Jennifer, even as a child. After they gave us those scholarships, my dad sat me down and said, some opportunities only come once in a lifetime, son. Best not to ask too many questions. Hayes shook his head, disgust evident in his expression. I was old enough to understand what he meant. My silence had been bought. Did you ever try to come forward later? Mendez asked. Once in my 20s, I called the police station, asked about the Rowe case. The officer said it was considered solved, that they'd found evidence Caleb had been picked up by a drifter passing through. Hayes frowned. When I pushed, saying I had information, he got real interested in my name and number. Said a detective would call me back. Instead, 2 days later, my apartment was broken into, Nothing taken except my high school yearbook and some old papers. You think it was connected? I know it was. The next day I got a call from an attorney representing Hollow Creek Academy's endowment fund. Said they were establishing a scholarship in memory of long-standing faculty, and had selected me to receive a grant for my graduate studies. $20,000. Hayes's laugh was bitter. I took the money and kept my mouth shut. Been hating myself for it ever since. Armed with these testimonies, Mendez obtained a warrant to search the Academy's administrative archives. In a climate-controlled room in the administration building's sub-basement, they found a trove of documents carefully preserved, board minutes, financial records, and correspondence dating back decades. Among them was a folder labeled Student Welfare Committee, 1979-1980. Inside were minutes from an emergency meeting held just 1 week after Caleb's disappearance. Present were Headmaster Phillips, Board Chairman William Harcourt, School Attorney James Westfield, and Byron Chetland. The discussion, recorded in careful handwriting, was ostensibly about improving security measures following the unfortunate incident. But between bureaucratic language about perimeter assessments and supervision protocols lay a damning paragraph regarding statements made by students GH and JW concerning CR's alleged observations of unauthorized activity in the lower-level storage areas. The committee concurs with Mr. Westfield's assessment that pursuing this line of inquiry would be detrimental to the ongoing police investigation and potentially damaging to the Academy's accreditation review scheduled for April. Ms. Chetland has provided a full accounting of all inventory currently stored in said areas, which the committee accepts as complete and accurate. The committee recommends the immediate implementation of the Structural Integrity Improvement Plan for the East Wing basement. Previously scheduled for summer. They knew, Mendez said, staring at the document. They all knew what Chetland had done, and they covered it up. The school's current attorney, present during the search, blanched visibly. Detective, these minutes don't specifically state. Save it, Mendez cut him off. They deliberately silenced witnesses, falsified inventory records, and sealed off a crime scene, all to protect the school's reputation while an accreditation review was pending. That evening, Mendez presented her findings to the district attorney, who immediately approved expanding the investigation to include former administrators still living, 3 board members, the school attorney, and Headmaster Phillips' widow. This wasn't just one man's crime, Mendez explained. This was institutional. They chose the school's reputation over a child's life. What none of them yet realized was how literal that choice had been. As forensic experts continued their examination of the boiler room, they were about to discover that Caleb Rowe had never left Hollow Creek Academy at all. The truth lay hidden behind yet another wall, one that had been hastily constructed 45 years earlier, concealing evidence of a panic-driven decision that had cost the 12-year-old boy everything. And in a nursing home 60 miles away, 91-year-old former Headmaster Phillips read about the investigation in his morning newspaper, placed a call to his attorney, and began the process of unburdening his soul before time ran out, not just for justice, but for what remained of his own conscience. The ground-penetrating radar detected an anomaly behind the northwestern wall of the boiler room. Not on the original blueprints, the cinder block wall appeared to have been hastily constructed, with mortar of a different composition than the surrounding structure. This section was added later, the forensic architect confirmed, comparing the wall to the original building plans. Sometime between 1979 and 1981, based on the materials, Mendez secured an emergency order to breach the wall. As the demolition crew carefully removed the first row of blocks, a distinctive odor emerged, the unmistakable scent of a space long sealed and undisturbed. "Everyone back," Mendez ordered, when the opening was large enough to peer through. The beam of her flashlight illuminated a small chamber, no larger than a storage closet. In the corner lay a small human-shaped bundle. The medical examiner worked methodically, documenting everything before the remains were removed. The skeleton was small, consistent with a 12-year-old boy. Scraps of fabric still clung to the bones, the colors faded but recognizable as the clothing Caleb had been wearing the day he disappeared. Jeans, sneakers, and a plaid shirt his mother had described in her police statement 45 years earlier. Cause of death? Mendez asked quietly when the examination was complete. The medical examiner pointed to the skull. Blunt force trauma to the occipital region, the back of the head. Single blow, significant force, He indicated fracture patterns with his gloved finger. Death would have been rapid, possibly instantaneous. Near the body they found something else, a green plastic army man, identical to the one in the lunchbox, and scratch marks on the inside of the wall. Some appeared to spell a single word, Mom. He was alive when they sealed him in, Mendez whispered, staring at the marks. He survived the blow, woke up in the dark. The revelation sent shockwaves through the investigation. DNA confirmed what they already knew. The remains were Caleb Rowe's. The town police station became the center of a media storm as reporters descended from across the country. All attention turned to the architects of this decades-old cover-up. But Byron Chetland, the most critical piece of the puzzle, proved elusive. Records showed he had retired from Hollow Creek in 1992, moving to Florida where he'd lived quietly until his death 3 years ago. Convenient timing, Mendez remarked bitterly, tossing Chetland's death certificate on her desk. Dies of natural causes just as we're digging up his crime, but Chetland hadn't completely escaped justice. His daughter, now in her 60s, contacted police after seeing the news. My father never spoke about his time at Hollow Creek, she explained, handing Mendez a key. But when he was dying he gave me this and made me promise to keep it safe. Said someday someone might come looking for it. The key opened a safety deposit box in a local bank. Inside was a leather-bound journal and a sealed envelope addressed to the family of Caleb Rowe. The journal contained meticulous records of Chetland's black market operation, equipment stolen, profits made, payoffs to security guards and delivery drivers. The final entry, dated May 14, 1979, the day Caleb disappeared, contained a confession. The boy surprised me in the storage room. I only meant to scare him, make him promise to keep quiet. When he said he was going to tell the headmaster, I pushed him away. He fell against the corner of the metal shelving. There was so much blood, I panicked. Wrapped him in a tarp and hid him in the unused room behind the boiler. Planned to move him after dark, but when I returned, he had regained consciousness. He'd crawled to the door, was scratching at it. I did what I had to do. For my family, my future. Phillips and the board agreed the school couldn't weather the scandal, not with the accreditation board coming. They provided the materials to seal the room, said no one would ever need to know. God forgive me. I hear the scratching in my dreams. The sealed letter contained a full confession and Chetland's life insurance policy, naming Caleb's mother as beneficiary. Coward to the end, Mendez said, sealing the evidence. Waited until he was safely finished before facing what he'd done. With Chetland's confession in hand, the investigation shifted to his accomplices. Former headmaster Phillips, now 91 and in failing health, agreed to a deathbed confession in exchange for immunity for his family. His testimony implicated 4 board members who had authorized the cover-up, constructed an elaborate story about a child wanderer lost in the woods, and later approved scholarships to silence potential witnesses. 2 of those board members were still alive. Within days, both were arrested on charges of accessory after the fact, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. As news of the arrests spread, other former students came forward with stories of suspicious activities at Hollow Creek during that era. Missing equipment, financial irregularities, and a culture of silence enforced through scholarships and threats. What had begun as an investigation into one child's disappearance was expanding into a broader examination of institutional corruption spanning decades. In the midst of this unfolding scandal, Gene Talbot continued his quiet work at the school, avoiding reporters who sought interviews with the janitor who cracked the case. He had never wanted attention, only answers. One evening, as he was leaving his shift, he found an elderly woman waiting by his truck. Her face, lined with years of grief, was instantly recognizable from the news. Margaret Rowe, Caleb's mother, who had never stopped searching for her son. "You found my boy," she said simply, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I wanted to thank you." On a crisp autumn morning, exactly 45 years after Caleb Rowe disappeared, Hollow Creek Academy held a memorial service. The maple trees that lined the campus drive blazed with the same red and gold hues that had framed Caleb's final day. Where the condemned East Wing once stood now lay an open courtyard, its center dominated by a bronze statue of a boy with a book in one hand and a lunchbox in the other. Margaret Rowe, now 82, sat in the front row, her spine straight despite decades of grief that would have broken most. Beside her sat Jean Talbot, uncomfortable in his only suit but steadfast in his support. They had formed an unlikely friendship in the months since Caleb's remains had been recovered, united by their connection to a boy neither had truly known. "We gathered today not just to remember Caleb," Principal Gardner said from the podium, her voice carrying across the assembled crowd, "but to acknowledge our institution's darkest chapter. Hollow Creek failed Caleb Rowe. We failed his family, and we failed every student who passed through these halls under the shadow of that betrayal." The investigation had torn Hollow Creek's prestigious reputation to shreds. 3 former board members had been convicted of obstruction of justice. The school's endowment had hemorrhaged millions as donors distanced themselves from the scandal. Enrollment had plummeted. For a time it seemed the academy might not survive. But from the ashes of disgrace came an opportunity for redemption. The board had voted unanimously to establish the Caleb Rowe Truth and Ethics Center, dedicated to teaching the importance of moral courage and institutional accountability. Every student would learn Caleb's story and the devastating consequences of the cover-up. As Gardner concluded her speech, Margaret Rowe rose shakily to her feet. The crowd fell silent as she approached the podium, her small frame seeming to grow stronger with each step. "My son loved learning," she began, her voice wavering but determined. "That last morning he was so excited about this field trip that he forgot his lunch on the kitchen counter. I had to chase the bus down the street." A ghost of a smile touched her lips at the memory. "All these years, I imagined him alive somewhere, growing up without me. I imagined him graduating college, getting married, having children of his own, but all along he was here, alone in the dark." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the gathered faces. "I've been asked if I can forgive what happened here. The truth is, I don't know. But I do know this. Caleb matters now in a way they never allowed him to matter then. His story will teach generations of children the importance of speaking truth, even when powerful people want silence." After the ceremony, the crowd dispersed to the Academy's museum, where a special exhibition had been prepared. At its center, in a glass case lined with blue velvet, sat Caleb's Star Wars lunchbox, the silent witness that had finally brought truth to light. Jean lingered behind, watching Margaret speak with former classmates of her son. In the months since his discovery, he had become something of a reluctant local hero. The town had offered him a civic award, which he had politely declined. A true crime podcast had tried to secure exclusive rights to his story, which he had flatly refused. "Not much for the spotlight, are you?" Detective Mendez appeared at his side, hands in the pockets of her trench coat. "Never saw the appeal," Jean replied with a shrug. "Just did what anyone would do." "But they didn't, Jean." "That's the point." Mendez nodded toward the assembled dignitaries. "All these important people walked past that wall for 45 years. You were the only one who noticed something wasn't right and cared enough to look closer." As the afternoon waned, Margaret found Jean sitting alone on a bench in the new courtyard, staring at the bronze statue of her son. "They got his smile wrong," she said softly, settling beside him. "Caleb never smiled that wide for strangers." "I'm sorry I never knew him," Jean replied. "In a way you knew him better than anyone." Margaret placed her weathered hand over his. "You heard him when everyone else had stopped listening." The following week, Jean returned to his routine, mopping floors, changing light bulbs, keeping the academy running behind the scenes. The media attention gradually faded, as newer scandals captured the public's imagination. The condemned board members began serving their sentences. Byron Chetland's remains were disinterred from his respectable Florida cemetery plot and reburied in an unmarked grave at his family's request. Life moved on, as it always does. But something fundamental had changed at Hollow Creek Academy. In the hallways where silence had once been institutionalized, students now debated ethics and questioned authority. The Caleb Rowe Memorial Scholarship Fund sponsored students from underprivileged backgrounds, and every year a special ceremony commemorated the day a janitor had followed his curiosity down to a basement and given voice to a boy whom time had nearly forgotten. One evening, as Jean was locking up the East Wing, he noticed a student lingering by the memorial statue, a girl about 12, with serious eyes and an open notebook. "What are you writing?" he asked. "A poem," she replied, "about seeing things others miss." Jean nodded, understanding. "That's important work." "Were you scared?" she asked suddenly, "when you found the lunchbox?" Jean considered this. Not scared, just sad that it took so long. He gestured toward her notebook. Keep writing. Keep noticing. That's how we make sure there are no more Calebs. As he walked away, Jean glanced back at the statue silhouetted against the setting sun. A bronze boy forever 12, whose voice had finally been heard. Not a happy ending, but perhaps a just one. And in a world where justice often came too late, or not at all, that had to count for something.